Okay, hi y'all. We are now live. Welcome to one of the several days of Netroots Nation, or welcome back, I should say. My name is Mallory Long. I use she, her, hers, and I am your trainer for this evening session, The Secrets of Successful Volunteer Leadership Teams. I'm super excited to be here with you all for the next 90 minutes. And I think we can really just get right into it. I'll get through sort of all the logistics along the way. So without further ado, let's talk a little bit. Before we get into all the fun, I do actually just like to start with a welcome and a little bit of audience participation. I love participation, so please, please, please let me know where you're joining from today and what your role is in your organization. You can use the chat. I think for participants, the chat's going to be on the right-hand side. Just let us know who you are, where you're coming from today, perhaps whatever you'd like to share. I can obviously start. My name is Mallory Long. Like I said, she, her, hers. I am the trainer tonight for the National Democratic Training Committee, but in my day job, I am the training director at an organization called All on the Line. We work on redistricting and ending gerrymandering. So it's a little bit about what I do. I'm the training director, and I live in Baltimore, Maryland. I see New York in the chat. Hello, New York. Anybody else want to make themselves known? Just New York showing up really strong. All right, well, I'm from Baltimore, so East Coast, the East Coast is here. Wonderful. Well, I'm going to move us right along, getting us ready to train. So first of all, we are here for 90 minutes. So key to being able to participate is being comfortable. So let's take just 1 minute, take a deep breath, make sure that you are comfortable, that you're comfortably seated, that you're where you want to be, that you're in reach of your things, whatever you might need. And we'll take just like a little stretch here. And we'll get started. I see a few more folks in the chat. Hello. I see Minneapolis has joined the chat. I see Charlotte, North Carolina has joined the chat. So hello, welcome. We're just about to get into the good stuff. So I'm going to move us right along. Some of our virtual live training norms here today. Number one, be respectful, of course. We're here to have conversation. We're here to get folks what they need. We're going to do the very best that we can. We're going to use the chat box a lot during this session. We might have some varying sort of ideas, some different ideas, some different feelings based on our experience. I'm here to talk to you all from the perspective of some of my own experience. And so it might not always be what you experience, and that's okay. We can talk about that. We'll just do so in a way that is respectful. Be present, of course, as much as you are able. We know that we continue to be in unprecedented times, and you might have other things that you need to be paying attention to. That is no problem. I totally get it. But as you can really be engaged, it means a lot to me personally. And I hope that you'll learn something new with me as well. And then number 3 is asking questions and participating. You may have noticed already in our setup here in the platform, you all have access to the chat box, and you can see, got a question, type it into the chat box. The chat box is y'all's place. I can't type in the chat box, so I might pull some things out of the chat box. You can ask questions in the chat box, of course. If and as you remember, it is helpful for me if you can type question ahead of your question. It helps me sort of sort through what's going on in the chat, because you all should feel free to use that for other things. I will stop periodically to answer questions. So I will be honest, I'm a very easily distracted trainer. So in the effort of being less distracted today, I will probably not watch the chat sort of like in real time, but I will stop periodically, check the chat, see if there are questions we can answer. And then any time that we have remaining at the end of our session, we can also use for questions. So please, please, please don't hesitate to start putting your questions in the chat. All right, our objectives for today. learn how to give volunteers leadership opportunities using the ladder of engagement, and review the components of one-on-one conversations. I have to tell you all, I'm very excited. I love talking about the ladder of engagement. I love talking about volunteer engagement. And we'll talk about that just a little bit in a moment. Before we do, this section, this conversation around volunteer leadership and volunteer development is part of a larger campaign's field plan. If you're familiar with anything that the National Democratic Training Committee does, if you've seen any of their other trainings, they often use this puzzle piece image in reference to the several pieces, the several plan pieces that come together to make a campaign plan. Field is one part of that plan, and it is it details how your campaign is going to reach voters in a direct way, so in that direct contact, and how many of those voters you need to contact and get to vote for you to win. So this is part of our field plan. And volunteer leaders, I cannot stress this enough. This is where I'm very excited to start talking about volunteers. Volunteer leaders are really key to success on campaigns. I was a volunteer. I was a volunteer on most of the campaigns that I actually ended up working for. Most notably, I actually started volunteering for Planned Parenthood many, many years ago. I was volunteering for Planned Parenthood after college. I guess it was 2010 or 2011, right around the time that Congress, the time in 2010 or 2011 that Congress was trying to defund Planned Parenthood, I got involved. And being a volunteer at Planned Parenthood led me to being a volunteer for President Obama's re-election campaign, which ended up resulting in me working as a field organizer on President Obama's re-election campaign. And then after the election, actually going back to Planned Parenthood as a staff person. I worked at Planned Parenthood for about 7 years in their campaigns department. And now I, work on a little bit of a different campaign, but I do feel very passionately about the ladder of engagement. I feel very passionately about volunteer engagement because when I finished college, I didn't know that you could be an organizer, like a political organizer. I didn't know that you could do this kind of work. And volunteering gave me that opportunity to actually learn what it was and what it was about, and see if I liked it, and I would posit to say that I did like it because I have stuck around. So I feel really strongly about it, and volunteers really are the key to success because they expand your capacity to make success possible. As we talk a lot about on campaigns, and you don't quite see, this is sort of like not quite the original like snowflake sort of image on the left-hand side. It's a little bit different. It's a little updated, but sort of that same idea, right? That when we grow our capacity, when we grow our team, I should say, when we grow our team, we grow our work exponentially. The amount of work that volunteers are able to do by taking on these like smaller pieces or by being leaders is what makes success possible. If you as an individual had to talk to 5,000 voters to win your election, that would probably be really challenging unless you were starting, I don't know, like 2 years early, which doesn't really make a lot of sense, right? You really do need that capacity. And also your volunteers, they are in most cases, the most connected to the communities in which you're working, than anybody else, which is not to say that like you might not know, you don't know your communities or that you don't work in communities that but it is always just going to be a little bit different for us on the campaign side. We just have those campaign brains, right? And it is a little bit different. It's a little bit different than that grassroots community connection. Particularly because those volunteers can really validate you and validate your campaign. One of my most favorite volunteer leaders ever, Jim Strayer, was a 64-year-old surgical nurse from Oberlin, Ohio, in 2012 on President Obama's re-election campaign. I worked in Oberlin, Ohio, very close to where I grew up. And Jim Strayer and really all of the all the whole town, they were really all very engaged and had been engaged in electoral work many times. And so Jim Strayer was the first person that I met with in Oberlin when I started working on the campaign as an organizer. And all I had to do was meet with him, and everybody else knew after that that the organizer for the reelection campaign was here. She was on the ground. She was getting ready to go. She was starting to meet with people. She was starting to host phone banks. Jim Strayer was responsible for bringing in so very many of my volunteers, partially because it was a town in which they had sort of like built and flexed their political muscle, but also because he was that validator, right? And people knew him, and people knew that they, wanted to be involved, and then they could just jump right in. So, I think that that's really important. It also is, it's just, I think volunteers are so fun. I think that there really is such a benefit as professionals, as campaign professionals, to be working with folks who are really passionate and care about our work, but don't necessarily do it for a paycheck. I just think that there's a lot of value in that. We love volunteer leaders. Okay, so I know that I asked you all to, introduce yourself a little bit, where you were calling in from in the chat, but I have an icebreaker now, which is slightly different. When was the last time you volunteered for an organization other than your own? You can type in the chat. I will say, when I saw this slide coming up in my deck, I started to sweat a little bit because it has been a minute. I actually don't really think that I've volunteered since the election, since the 2020 election. Myself personally, it's been a little bit of a wild year, but what about y'all? I haven't seen anything in the chat yet. Last time you volunteered for an organization other than your own? Anybody want to share? Nobody in the chat? All right. Oh, here we go. Yes, the executive director for the nonprofit. Oh, pro bono exec director. Yeah, Jeff's busy. Jeff is busy. Aha. Oh, there we go. Yeah, volunteered in 2003, right after graduating from grad school. Karen's been volunteered in August and starting again next week. Karen, you might be our super vol in our chat today. Ooh, Ari, been with Surge and PA Stands Up. Love that. I get so many good texts from Surge. They have a really great text program. Oh, Britt volunteered this summer. Yes. Okay, good. This is great, because the thing about understanding volunteer engagement in the volunteer process, if you've been a volunteer, that makes your life a lot easier, because you've actually been there, right? You've actually been there, and you've actually had the experience. And speaking of experiences, what a good sort of segue here to the first really like meaty part of our conversation, which is about giving volunteers leadership opportunities. And so I think before we get into sort of like the nitty gritty here, what I want to say is that your volunteers can, like I said, increase your capacity exponentially. One of the ways in which you can do that in particular is by giving your volunteers more ownership over the work as time goes on, taking things out of your hands, giving you more capacity personally, and also developing the skill set of your volunteers. And so when we're talking about volunteer leadership, the first thing I want to talk about here is the ladder of engagement. I talk about the ladder of engagement in my day job probably about every day. I really love the ladder of engagement. The ladder of engagement here, very simply defined as a framework designed to deepen engagement by asking someone to take increasingly important actions leading to an ultimate goal. So this is a way to help us understand how someone goes from being like uninvolved and like maybe a supporter all the way to being a volunteer leader um like runs your team. And I would even say that I like to think of the ladder engagement personally as staff is actually the last rung on the ladder of engagement. Folks can go from volunteer leadership to staff, and that's also really excellent. That is development. That is like, building the bench, I think, as folks would say. So that's possible too. I would love for folks who are playing along at home, if you are familiar with the concept of the ladder of engagement, send me an exclamation point in the chat. Just waiting to see if I get any exclamation points in the chat. Oh yeah, there we go. Exclamation point in the chat. So we've got some familiarity here. Wonderful, wonderful. It's not too late for you to drop in your exclamation point. The good news is that it's also not too late for you to learn all about the ladder of engagement. If it's new to you, that's totally great. Jeff, I'm here for you. I'm ready to talk about what that ladder of engagement entails. So the thing about the ladder of engagement, the first thing that I like for folks to know is that exactly how your ladder of engagement is going to be constructed really is going to depend on your organization, your goals, the actions that you take, the resources that you have, just like everything in between. But the idea here, like I said, is that you're taking folks who maybe are not engaged, or maybe are just like very loosely engaged. Maybe they like are supportive, and you want to deepen their engagement, and you're going to do that sort of slowly over time. Through the ladder of engagement, it is a way that you can give people sort of increasingly important roles in the organization, and each rung here of the ladder does represent a different level of engagement, right? You can see it looks, like a ladder, it looks like steps, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, which place do I want to go next? I love talking about this. So what's important to know is that this is, like I said, sort of what specifically like lives in each of these buckets may vary a little bit. And then what also may vary a little bit is how your volunteers will move up and down the ladder of engagement. But the concept remains the same. Nobody becomes a super volunteer overnight. Nobody is just sort of like born an amazing volunteer. They have gotten some development at some time, right? And so this sort of shows what that development, what it sort of like could entail. And I'm just seeing Jeff says, we publicize, participate, organize, lead as our ladder, but could use some internal intermediate steps. Yeah, and that like really makes sense to me, Jeff. Like that makes so participate, organize, lead. Totally. I think that, and we'll talk about this, is like the way that you sort of start to get a little bit more into the nitty gritty in the ladder of engagement is like you break that down and start looking at participation, right? So there are lots of different ways that people might participate. You might be you might participate as someone who, like signs petitions, right? Or you might be someone who responds really well to email asks. Maybe you participate via text. Maybe you participate, you actually like show up to events, right? And those types of participation, they have like different weights almost, right? Taking an action from a text message is very different than showing up to a volunteer meeting. And so sort of being able to place that on your ladder of engagement, and, sort of, it's almost like disaggregating is what I would think about it. Disaggregating participate, disaggregating organize, disaggregating leading, I think could be helpful. And the last thing I'll say, like right here while we're on the ladder of engagement, is that definitely sort of the setup here and the implication of the ladder is that that people start at the bottom of the ladder, right? And that definitely is true sometimes, but people really can show up sort of anywhere in the ladder based on, again, their own resources, their own experiences, what they know about, what they've done in the past. It can all make a difference to how people are able to engage in your ladder of engagement. I'm going to pause here for just 1 second, take a drink. If folks have other questions about the concept, I'm happy to answer them now because I'm going to move in the next direction. So I'll just stay here for 1 more second. Okay. Not seeing anything else, so I'm going to move us right along. I imagine what some of you might be thinking is like, okay, Mallory, that's all fine and good. My ladder of engagement is going to look different based on my organization. And the way that people are going to show up in my ladder of engagement is also going to look different based on their interests and what they've done before and what their past experiences have been and how they're coming into the work. So what does that mean? How do I put anybody in my ladder of engagement then, right? And the answer is that it just means that you have to know a little bit about your people to be able to assess where they sit in the ladder of engagement. And then you can figure out, if you want to move them forward, how might you do that? So you got to strengthen those relationships. Organizing continues to be all about relationships and knowing what your people sort of might be interested in, understanding their motivation, like their intensity. Well, there's lots of things actually that you need to understand, and we're going to talk about it in a different slide. But definitely the way that you are going to know is by strengthening these relationships. And that's going to happen most often in one-on-one conversation. You can see here, one-on-one conversation, an organizing tool featuring an authentic conversation about values and goals that connect to people. Folks may be familiar with the one-on-one conversation. It's a very, very important tool in the toolkit. Even if you're not familiar with the term one-on-one, you probably have done a one-on-one before. It's a meeting where the goal is to establish, maintain, or deepen a volunteer relationship. And being able to engage with people one-on-one is just a very effective tool to build relationships and rapport with your volunteers, new or not, to gain further insight onto that motivation, to understand what people's own goals are. Like a lot of people come to volunteer for different reasons. Understanding those reasons, understanding what people are trying to get out of their volunteer experience, and finding ways to, maybe meet in the middle, or get them those things that they're looking for. To redirect your volunteers' energy, sometimes, you get a volunteer, man. Even my super volunteer, Jim Strayer, I remember one time he bought like a cardboard cutout of Barack Obama, and he was in like a superhero costume, and he and like a couple of the Oberlin College students were like running it around and, just sort of doing visibility, I suppose you could call it, but the whole thing was very silly. And we needed people out on the doors, right? So I had to go get my super volunteer because he was just trying to go have like a little bit of fun, play around with the Oberlin College kids, but it was not the time, So your one-on-one can do a lot of different things, and can again look different ways. A one-on-one, it might be 15 minutes, it might be 45 minutes, probably somewhere in between there, depending on the purpose of the conversation and the relationship that you already have maybe with that person. It also depends a lot on if people are like talkers, right? I know you might be shocked to hear that I'm like super a talker and I love to talk. Um, I love to talk, and I'll talk your head off if you let me, you know. So a one-on-one with me is probably going to run closer to 45 minutes than it is to 15 minutes. But it also depends, you know, on if you're already aligned on something, if you need to find that alignment. It really just, you know, varies based on the very specific situation. I see a question here that's a really good question, and I'm going to hold it until we get just a little further in, because I think that it'll make sense when we get to the other side. So, just briefly, we'll talk about the types of one-on-ones. There are 3 types of one-on-ones that we talk about in organizing, and that first one is introductory. Like I said, this is sort of where you're going to be able to place this new person on your ladder of engagement. Understand what motivates them, what kind of skills they might be able to contribute, and sort of get them into the right place on your ladder. And then there's the maintenance one-on-one, which is sort of like a check-in, sort of like a post new experience sort of check-in. So after the volunteer has maybe done a few activities, tried a few different things, to check in to understand how their experience is, to be able to like give them assistance, advice, feedback, right? Like if you heard that somebody was like maybe had a bad experience on the doors, or like, oh, for example, I had this in a campaign last week that I was running where I had an organizer who was making calls to folks on the phone, and he has an accent, and he was having a really hard time getting people on the phone to understand what he was saying. He was having a really bad time, and so we did, you know, we checked in, talked a little bit about it, and I mean, ultimately, we tried to, you know, we moved him, we gave him some other stuff to do that wouldn't require him to be on the phones like that, because it was just not a great experience. That's not always going to be the case. Sometimes people just need a little bit of coaching, right? And so maybe in that maintenance one-on-one, someone's saying, you know, I had like a bad experience with this or that, or like one I get all the time, people will say, you know, I didn't get like anybody to answer my calls. Like, you know, nobody picked up my phone calls. And first of all, I think, you know, always helping people understand what the typical contact rate is, and that actually if 2 people picked up your phone call, you might not be in as bad a shape as you think you are. But also maybe understanding, are they using a phone number that's not local? Are they blocking their phone number before they're making those calls? Like some of those different things that can really impact the volunteer experience. Your maintenance one-on-one is going to give you the opportunity to like to understand those things, to be able to give some of that coaching, and or to like find the place or another place to plug somebody in. And then the escalation one-on-one, the spiciest of all the one-on-ones, is about moving someone intentionally up the ladder of engagement. So this is like a very intentional conversation, and it's where you're asking them to take on more responsibility in your campaign or in your organization. And that's really what we're going to focus on today, because as Jeff maybe unknowingly has hinted at a little bit, moving your volunteers up the ladder of engagement and increasing their skill and increasing their capacity is critical to growing your reach, right? You know, it's great if you have 100 volunteers who want to make phone calls. That's awesome, but if they're just making phone calls, you know, maybe that's actually too many people. Maybe you're going to run out of calls too fast. You want to be able to put other people in other spots so that it's not just you cutting phone lists for 100 people, right? That there's maybe folks who help you onboard, folks who help you train, folks who do tech support, folks who cut lists, whatever it might be. You need that additional capacity to grow your reach exponentially. That's really important. So we're going to focus on this escalation one-on-one. And actually, I'm sorry, I want to make sure that I explicitly answer Jeff's question because I do think that it works right here while we're talking about the escalation. Jeff asks in the chat, how do we scale one-on-one conversations with large volunteer groups? And Jeff and everyone, like I might have hopefully just alluded to, the answer is developing a subset of your volunteers to the point on the ladder of engagement, which again, you have to sort of decide where this lives, but to the point on the ladder of engagement where your volunteers can do one-on-ones with other volunteers. And so I want to first start by saying that when we talked about the ladder of engagement, I said no good volunteer is made overnight. And I want to say also that like no incredible volunteer engagement program is built overnight either. It does take time to build the relationships, to build the skill sets, but I think ultimately in the scenario that Jeff sort of posed in the question, your ideal outcome is that you have volunteer leaders who you have trained to be able to do these one-on-ones, and then either, I would say it's probably an either or, you have like either a system or a process for getting like debriefs and notes of those one-on-ones, the useful information that helps you plug people in. Or if you really have advanced volunteers, which I think this really is the gold star, like the A++, is that your volunteers have their own systems because they are really managing like full volunteer groups, right? And that could be in Obama land, we called them neighborhood teams. I know that neighborhood teams, people don't like love hearing those words put together all the time, but your neighborhood teams or your ledge advocacy councils or however you might say it, that they're actually running those teams and they are building their teams all the time in such a way that like you might not even know every time one of your volunteers is about to have an introductory one-on-one, because they're just doing that work on their own. Extra emphasis on that. That is, like I said, the A++, that is like, you've had like an organizing game for years and years really on the ground, a sort of a North Star. But definitely I would say if you're looking to scale up and those one-on-one conversations, it is the first place that people will sort of like make cuts, right? We don't have time. We don't have time. And people are very busy. I do not want to dismiss in any sense of how busy people are. But what I can tell you from experience is that the time that you spend developing volunteers on the front end will pay dividends on the back end. It can just feel a little frustrating on the front. But definitely is I'm trying to think of words that I haven't already used yet. I feel like I just say, the same words over and over again, but it is important. It is critical. It's how you grow exponentially. Coming back though into the actual meat of the one-on-one conversation, the escalation one-on-one, this is a tool where we are asking people to step up and lead in a particular role. So, oh my gosh. Do you ever, well, I was going to ask you all, do you ever start talking, you go on like a tangent about something and you forget that it's in the deck that you're talking about? Because that's where I am right now. This image is everything. Going back to Jeff's question, the importance of escalating leadership, right? You can sort of see here in the image that I just keep saying grow exponentially, but scaling does provide you that opportunity. It's a little bit of a chicken or the egg kind of thing. Like scaling provides you the opportunity to develop leaders. Developing leaders provide you the opportunity to scale. I think it's a little bit of both. Yeah, it's a little bit of both, but we know that it's important. I would love a little audience participation, and I'm just curious. So if you can, if you think that you have enough capacity at work, I want you to drop a star in the chat. Nope, I said that wrong. I was like, why am I setting myself up for no one to drop anything in the chat? Incorrect. If you wish you had more capacity at your at your job, on your campaign, whatever it may be, give me a star in the chat. That sounds more right. I feel like I'm gonna see some stars. Maybe. Maybe. If you wish you had more capacity, drop a star in the chat for me. Yep, I see a star. Allison's the quickest one. Allison, you're the quickest. Yep. Oh, Jeff has given me so many stars. Also, yes, Jeff, thank you. I love an enthusiastic participant. Yeah, we all want more capacity, right? This is a way for you to do that. Okay, but what does that actually look like, right? What does that actually look like? How do we actually give people more opportunity? Again, this is really going to vary based on like how your people fit into your work, what your work looks like, what their skill set is, all those different things. Of course, I have a variation of like electoral and issue advocacy organizing experience. And so, of course, when I was working on President Obama's reelection campaign, for example, we had, GOTV leads, and GOTV, that was one of the best GOTVs I've ever done. I never set foot in my office. I wasn't allowed to go into my office. It was completely volunteer run the entire GOTV weekend. My volunteers managed our staging location in our office, right? So they managed our staging location. They managed all of our actual canvassing. So they launched, of course, from the staging location. They managed all of our canvassing, and they managed like keeping everybody safe and comfortable and fed and flashlighted and all those other things. But that looks really different maybe from like in a lot of my own issue advocacy work. A lot of the work that I did was with storytellers, right? And so as a storyteller, maybe the way that you come up the ladder of engagement, someone with a story about your issue. We had a lot of our storytellers like host and MC events that we were doing. We did have them talk with other storytellers and do like coaching and training, different things like that. It really just depends on what your needs are and what your resources are, which I would argue is organizing just generally. Here we go. And here's an example ladder of engagement, specifically for canvassing, like for an electoral campaign. You can see here at the bottom, the very lowest piece of engagement here on the ladder is to attend a meet and greet and sign up to volunteer. You'll notice it says sign up to volunteer. You haven't actually done the volunteering yet, right? So that puts you at the lowest rung of that ladder of engagement. Once you come to a volunteer shift, that moves you up that ladder of engagement. You actually have done the action, right? And then maybe the next thing up that ladder is that they're canvassing 3 times a week. Up again, that they're bringing 2 friends to the canvas, that they're actually starting to grow your reach, right? Because as a canvasser, they might be able to, let's say they're doing 3 2-hour canvas shifts a week. So that's 6 hours of canvassing. And let's say they're hitting like 30 doors, in between all of those. I'm so sorry, y'all. I'm so bad at math. But that's 180 doors. If I bring 2 friends to all my canvas shifts, that increases my output by a lot. So maybe I'm bringing friends. Moving next up the ladder here is to begin serving as a Saturday canvas captain. That might be, you might be training other people, giving best practices, making sure that people have their clipboards and their waters and they're ready to go. And then up here, like the very last rung is begin serving as a volunteer team leader. And that would be someone who is like sort of like leading your volunteer team, the person who your canvas captain actually checks in with, right? how are your canvases this week? How were your shifts? What did people say on the doors? Things like that. Might go up to the volunteer team leader. Your volunteer team leader is also talking to your phone bank captain and your social media captain and your data captain and having the same conversations. What also is important here is that probably um, anybody, we'll say it's me for right now. I, as a volunteer, it's not very likely that I'm going to move myself very far up that ladder of engagement by myself, sort of like of my own accord, right? Um, maybe you can get from this like attending a meet and greet and signing up to volunteer, and then maybe that gets you to to your canvas or phone bank shift, and then like maybe again of your own accord you like start coming more, but it's not as frequent as we might hope for. And so the thing about moving people up the ladder of engagement is that you almost always have to ask, and you have to make these sort of like specific asks, right? So like if someone comes to a canvas, and it's like, okay, like Mallory, you did great on the canvas. That's so awesome. You're really good at this. Could you come back a few more times this week, right? Or you come back a few times, and then it's like, Mallory, you're like really a superstar. I bet you have some awesome friends who are also as good at this as you are. Like, can you bring 2 of them next time, right? We'll talk more. I'm getting into the hard ask, which I'm getting ahead of myself. So we'll talk a little bit more about this. But the ladder of engagement, that's sort of the idea. You're working within the structure that you have, and you are identifying how you can, or how or what you can ask folks for to start engaging them and moving them up that ladder. So with that discussion, would love to hear from folks in the chat. What are some volunteer leadership roles that you could use at your organization? I definitely hear that like Jeff might be looking for like a volunteer like lead, or like a welcome captain or something, right? Somebody to start meeting with volunteers to learn a little bit more about them, do some of that one-on-one. What are other roles that would be really helpful to you in your organization for volunteer leaders? What kind of volunteer leadership roles might work for you in your org? You can type that in the chat. Anybody? I saw those stars, y'all. You need help. Who do you need? There we go. Here's something. Definitely first order of business is outreach, expanding membership, and building a volunteer pool from there. Totally. Yeah, and like maybe what you're looking for, volunteer leadership roles, like you're looking for someone who can help with like outreach. I have had volunteer leaders who their whole role is finding places to go do that outreach, and getting scheduled and getting set up and being there and doing that outreach. And building the volunteer pool, again, like having those one-on-ones, definitely. I see Britt says an action lead, or like a point of contact for a specific targeted region. That's real. That's very real. That's sort of a way that I structure a lot of my teams in my work right now, partially because I work on redistricting. The geography matters a lot. And so I need to know if a volunteer lives in Houston or if they live in Austin. It makes a big difference. Ari says onboarding, training, process, documentation, research. Ari's got a whole volunteer team built here. Could do the whole snowflake and call it a night. But I love that. Yeah, thanks, Ari. Definitely. And I can't stress enough, as someone who was a volunteer trainer, and now I get to be a real life trainer all the time, having folks help train trainers or facilitators for member development and training series. Yes, especially because your volunteers often, or people who like want to volunteer, they have a lot of skills. And it might be stuff that like we don't always think about as super helpful to our work, or like maybe, we just sort of like need a moment. I would actually argue that trainers and facilitators are like one of those things. Being a good facilitator is very valuable, but definitely, and hosts and speakers for events, yeah, definitely, especially, it just like, it's awesome to see volunteers running events. We know that they're very capable of doing it. They just might need like a little bit of that development, and again, that very specific ask. All right, doing a quick time check here. We have about 45 minutes left. So, and what perfect timing, because we are moving in now to the second section of our training, which is about escalating those volunteer leaders, right? I know the whole thing has really been about escalating those volunteer leaders, but we're going to talk more specifically now about what those escalation one-on-ones actually are going to look like. There we go. So escalating our volunteer leaders, like we said, it does start with that one-on-one conversation, right? And you're gonna need to understand that person's motivation. You're gonna need to like identify the skills that they have, identifying their leadership skills, and then you want to test those skills. I want to say, as someone who has been sort of like around for a while, people don't love the term test. Sometimes it feels a little weird to folks, but I can assure you, you could use another term if you wanted to. But the point here really is that we do have to, we want to know, we want to be able to see that a person, before we ask them to take a step forward, to take on more responsibility, we do want to have at least like a little bit of an assessment, a little bit of an understanding of, if they actually like will be able to do the thing that you need them to do. And if so, and if they liked it, then you can do that escalation. And so that's why that one-on-one conversation is so important. So understanding leadership characteristics. So in the last slide, we talked about identifying leadership skills. Talking about some characteristics, so things that we want in our volunteers, and some things that we sort of want like across the board, whether someone wants to be a volunteer canvas manager or someone wants to be a host for an event, anything like that. There are sort of like some baselines. And so the first is time available, of course. You want to ask people who have the time to participate in your work to participate in your work. That makes sense. People who are committed to your cause. So people who really do care about your, specific thing that you're trying to do. And people who believe in the work of the organization, of course, and willingness to lead and do the work. Folks would say, I think I've heard this is actually not even true, but many years ago when I was working on a campaign, they would say, the ladder of engagement, moving people up the ladder of engagement, it's like boiling a frog, that you have to do it slowly so that people don't feel the heat turning up, which I have been told is like not how it works with frogs, but the sentiment still remains that you do want to consider all these pieces. You want to, I'm so sorry, y'all. See, I told you I'm an easily distracted trainer, and I said that thing about the frogs, and then I got way too into thinking about frogs. Leadership characteristics, potentially you're boiling the frog, but you want to give people those opportunities to show you their willingness to do the work, right? And it's hard to do. Volunteer leaders really are very special, because finding someone who meets all four of these criteria and then has like an additional sort of maybe skill set or whatever that contributes to your campaign, it's not every single person who like wants to come, into your office, which is obviously fine. Again, if everybody wanted to be a volunteer leader and no one wanted to be a volunteer, that would be a problem too, right? But so, your volunteer leaders, they're a little fewer, a little fewer and farther between potentially, but they definitely exist. And in having these conversations is where you'll start to see and understand who has these characteristics that you're looking for and the additional skill sets that you need to be successful. And so, um, again, talking about testing volunteer leader skills, again, this really depends on what your objectives are and like what kind of things you're doing. But again, I can't emphasize enough sort of like that dry run, right? You need to know, if the person that you are thinking of escalating, if they can do the thing. And then in the check-in, I'm coming all the way back around now to the frog. This is why we want to do those check-ins, right? We want to ask people to do a thing that is maybe like a portion of that leadership. We want to let them do it, and then we want to check in with them and ask them how it went and understand, what worked about it for them, maybe what didn't work for them, and then we get to decide, to continue with my metaphor that's not great, to turn up the heat, right? But it might be the moment actually that you decide not to turn up the heat, right? That maybe you need to keep it at a simmer. Maybe you got to turn it down a little bit. That happens. It's very normal. It's very expected. But some things that you can do if you are looking for ways to test volunteer leadership, you can see here again, really campaign, like electoral campaign focus here, running canvases, running phone banks, recruiting volunteers, training volunteers. When I was an organizer way back when, uh, sometimes we would even take like babyer steps before an ask like this, where like maybe before I ask you if you'll run a canvas, maybe I just ask you to bring the pens to the canvas, right? Or maybe before I ask you to run the phone bank, maybe I ask you to, like get our phone banking station organized or something like that, right? Like there are different different ways that you can do that. But this is sort of when you're looking to put someone into a leadership position, you want to make sure that they can lead, right? One of the things that I really love, and you've seen it here in this deck a few times, is asking volunteers to recruit other volunteers. It's a really, really good way to sort of see, what people are like interested in and like what they're capable of, and like, who they're connected to, what are their connections like, what is their ability to follow through, especially because it just is a little bit different than like handing someone a phone list and saying like, please reach out to these people that we've identified, right? It's about taking some of that initiative, right? Like having those conversations and bringing someone in to do like a shift. I personally do love that. Okay, let's practice. So I'll give you all a quick heads up so that you can be ready to type in the chat. I'm going to ask you to type in the chat. You can see the questions here. Marge is a consistently reliable canvasser who has been enthusiastically volunteering with your organization for 1 month. Marge recently shared with you that she is retiring from her full-time job soon and is curious about getting more involved with field organizing. Okay, so where is Marge currently on the ladder of engagement? Anybody have any guesses? Let me see if I can get us back to the ladder of engagement. This will be my greatest achievement if I can get us back there. Okay. So Marge is canvassing. Marge is doing canvassing. Marge is doing canvas shifts. She's been doing it for about a month. Anybody have any thoughts about where Marge might sit in our ladder of engagement? Any thoughts? Might be somewhere in the middle there. Man, okay, my eyebrows, that was too much. Took it a step too far. All right. It is contributing. Yeah, there we go. There we go. There we go. Woo, woo, woo. Okay. Thank you, team. I knew y'all were going to come through. Allison and Jeff coming through per usual. Contributing. Jeff says, I'd call that contributing because canvassing involves some thinking on the fly. Yeah, I agree. I would say contributing because it's doing that work, right? As opposed to maybe like observing or even like being trained. You are contributing. Definitely. Definitely. Okay, cool, 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 cool. Woo, all right. I'm gonna run us back down here. Okay, so Marge is contributing. Let's say we want to move Marge up that ladder of engagement. How could you test Marge's leadership skills? Do folks have any thoughts about that? So Marge is a canvasser. We want to move Marge up the ladder of engagement. I think it's not explicit here, but we'll say we want to move Marge up to be a canvas captain, right? What is a way that we could test Marge's leadership skills? Do folks have any thoughts about that? I think that we could ask Marge to hold on, I see someone in the chat. Yeah, give her a new task. Make her a co-captain once or twice. Yeah, Jeff, I really like that idea. Like, and it does a little bit fit into like how we think about training, or you can even see it in the ladder of engagement around like, in training, we might call it like the I do, we do, you do. So first, maybe I want Marge to like see how one of our canvas captains does it. See how one of our captains does it, like have the opportunity to do it herself, can manage a phone bank or do a training, can ask her to lead a canvas. Yes, 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 yes. All of these things are right. I think that you could even like take some pieces of the responses here and maybe before you want to give Marge like a whole canvas shift, I think, you know, as has been named here, you might do like a co-captain kind of thing. The other thing you could try, and that I have done many, many, many a time in my years as an organizer, is maybe I'm still the owner of the phone bank, but when people get to the phone bank, they're actually trained, like welcomed and trained by Marge. And like I let Marge sort of be the people person on the front end, getting people set up, like doing that check-in. It might not make Marge feel like she is like the captain of the phone bank, right? Or the canvas, but is like sort of beginning to take on that leadership piece. Any and all of these are good answers. It depends so much based on based on Marge, right? And like what we don't know here, right, is like maybe Marge is like a live wire is like what I might, you know, like call someone like she's just really sharp and she is ready to go take it on and do like whatever she needs to do. There are some folks who maybe are a little more timid, and it doesn't mean that they don't have the skill. It just means that they need the, you know, they need the ask and they need the practice and they might need a little more reassurance. So again, it just really varies based on your individual. Okay. Stopping here just to see if there are any immediate questions before we talk about this escalation, before we talk about that escalation one-on-one conversation. All right. I don't see anything, so I'm going to move us forward. Escalation one-on-one conversation. So this is actually the conversation part of that escalation one-on-one. What are we actually going to talk about when we have this escalation one-on-one? We want someone to move up the ladder of engagement, and we need to ask them to do that. How do we do that? 3 steps. The first is debriefing the volunteer's experience and celebrating their successes. I am under the impression most of the time this will be true, that if you are having the escalation conversation with a volunteer, that they were successful in whatever you asked them to work on. So you want to make sure that you talk about that experience, again, to go back to my bad metaphor of boiling the frog, because maybe they're good at it, but they hated it and they never want to do it again, right? That would definitely be something you want to know before you ask them to lead it. So you want to make sure that you debrief that experience, you celebrate their success, and then you want to explain the role and the responsibility that you need that volunteer to take on. And then you're going to make that hard ask and provide clear next steps. The hard ask, one of the best organizer tools, right? You want to just like ask and shut up and let that person answer your question. I do think that Colin is still here. And I'm very sorry because I did say that I wasn't going to put Colin up on the screen. But if it's possible to get Colin up here, maybe I need to do the exercise. Oh, Colin, hi.
Oh, I'm right there. Oh, this is so fun. I was looking. Yay.
Yeah, I do have to say, I really like this platform. I think it's like a very cool platform. I hope you all are also enjoying it home. Colin has been very, very gracious and is going to participate with me in a little role play, a little fishbowl exercise where I am going to be an organizer. Colin is going to be one of my volunteers. Colin, I think I'm just going to call you Colin. I don't think that, I don't think you just take on like a whole new persona, for this, unless you want to, but what I'm going to do, so we're going to do a little escalation one-on-one. You can see the prompt here. As a local Democratic Party, you need to build your volunteer teams for 2022 now. It's true. Colin is a motivated, reliable volunteer who recently led a successful phone bank by herself. And you, me, need Katie to become, or Colin to become a phone bank captain and lead 2 phone banks every week. So we're going to do this role play and I'm going to say, oh my gosh, Colin, hi, how are you? How was your phone bank?
Oh, Mallory, oh my gosh. Well, you're calling to ask me how my phone bank went?
Yeah, I saw the number. I mean, I saw, of course, the reporting in the van. It looks like people made a ton of calls, but I wanted to see like how it went.
Okay, so it went really well. I'll be honest, some people didn't show up though. So I was really sad about that and I don't really know what to do about it. But we did have like a group of folks and, we started off talking about like why we were there to get everyone excited because, sometimes calls can be hit or miss. And I could probably do training a little bit better. I feel like I went really quick, but I had people try to practice in pairs like you told me to do. And then we were just trying to keep energy going. So I think that was kind of the harder thing in an evening phone bank. People are tired after work and I don't know. So I want to figure out how to make that better for next time. Yeah, and I prepared for it. So I think that's kind of how it went.
Amazing. Colin, that's great. I mean, it sounds like, you had a couple of challenges. I don't think that they're like abnormal or like insurmountable challenges. I think that probably, especially with volunteer attendance, like we do usually expect that you'll have a couple of, flakes, as we might call them, who may not show up. I do wonder if next time, if you tried to do your confirmation text the day of on top of your confirmation call, so night before you're making that call, right? And then day of, maybe you're sending a text message, maybe just a few hours before to say, hey, here's the materials, want to make sure you're still good to make calls tonight. Let me know if you need anything. That might end up being helpful and just sort of like eliminating some of that flake.
Oh, you don't think they would annoy people, bugging them too much to make sure they show up?
Oh no, I don't think so. I think that people who like want to be engaged with us, they actually do want to hear from us, right? And at minimum, it gives that person another opportunity to let you know if something did come up and they're not going to make it, and that you can get them rescheduled. I don't think that you need to worry about it. I think that people will be appreciative, because Colin, you're actually quite good at this. You've been like a really great volunteer with us. You're super reliable. You've been like so great with the new volunteers, bringing people on. And I have just like loved seeing you like do your own phone bank. I do. I love seeing you do your own phone bank, and you know that 2022 is just like a huge year for us. The campaign in 2022 is going to be so important. There's a lot at stake, and we're already working on like building up our capacity to make sure that we can reach all the voters that we need to reach, and also to like have a clean volunteer experience. And in order to do that, I do want to start offering 2 volunteer phone banks every week, so that we can bring more people in, have like more of a schedule. And I just think that you are really good at this. And I wanted to ask if you would be able to be a lead on one of our phone banks weekly, so that you could just be our phone bank captain, and that we know that you will be able to help us execute on a weekly basis. What do you think about that?
Ooh, well, I'm honored that you see my leadership abilities to do this. Two, I'm a little nervous to commit because I feel like, did you say it would be 2 nights a week? There's 2 phone banks I'd be leading.
So there are 2 phone banks, but I'm just asking if you might be able to take the first one for now, and then I'm gonna see if Rafi can lead the other phone bank for right now.
Okay. My question is, would it be the same time and day every week?
Yeah, I think that would be my idea, unless your availability is such that we would want to do something a little bit different. I'm a little flexible on that, but yeah, I'm thinking once a week, either like Tuesdays or Wednesdays, probably like maybe starting at like 6:30 or 7, having like a little bit of a longer shift so people can kind of drop in and out.
Ooh. Okay, well, I'll be honest, my work schedule sometimes really ebbs and flows with what's happening on a evening or weekend schedule. So it makes me a little bit nervous to commit. So I'm sorry to get so specific, but what do you think the hourly breakdown like looks like aside from like actually executing the event, or is it me showing up? Because I know especially if we're growing our volunteers, that's a lot of confirms to do.
Yeah, what a good question, Colin. So I think that aside from like, the 2-hour phone bank shift, I think it's about 2 more hours a week of doing those confirms, and then just like being available for questions on the volunteer Slack.
Okay, well, I'm looking at my calendar now. One, I would be honored to be a captain of this phone bank, and I want to figure out with the team if there is a day that I need to to look. I will look at it in my schedule. But if there's something where like once a month or every other month I might not be available, I can't commit and say every single Tuesday at 6 o'clock for the year and a half I'll be available. So if we could just figure out some sort of contingency to backfill, and I'm happy to help connect with Rafi on that too, so we can kind of support each other. But I would love to do that. I'm putting it in my calendar, and then yeah.
Yeah, Colin, that sounds great. I totally understand. Of course, we want to work with you on your schedule, and I do wonder if maybe it makes sense for, like you mentioned, Rafi. Rafi also is like doing really great on the phone. So I wonder if, rather than thinking about the events, like the phone banks as like 2 separate events, maybe the 3 of us, me and you and Rafi, can like have a conversation about what we think is possible, how we can get 2 phone banks a week happening, and then maybe after that we'll have some conversations with like the larger team. But why don't we start there and see how we can sounds like maybe more of like a co-captain sort of deal, is what works in this like current iteration. So I think we should give it a try and figure it out. And I can't thank you enough, Colin. I'm super excited about it. I do think, like I said, you're awesome at this. We just like can't I can't say enough like how thankful we are for the work that you do with us. It makes such a big difference, and I think that this is going to be like a spot for you where your expertise is really going to really going to shine. So I'm excited about this. I will follow up with you around time for us to chat with Rafi. I'll send you an email and we'll take it from there.
Great. Well, this is so exciting, and I look forward to figuring out our schedules and how we can get more people to make calls with us. And so that I can help more people know how to reach our voters because it's just around the corner.
That's right. Before we know it. Cool. Well, thank you, Colin. I'll talk to you really soon. Have a good one.
Great. Thank you, Mallory, for all that you do. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye. Whew. Colin, thank you so much. Truly worthy of a SAG award. Y'all, I need you to come back to the chat and tell me what you think we did all right and what could be improved. What did we hear in this escalation one-on-one that we thought was good and what could be improved? I'm just gonna pop up here really quickly to show you those steps again. Debrief the volunteer's experience and celebrate their successes. Explain the role and responsibilities you need the volunteer to take on. And then making the hard ask and providing clear next steps. What did we do well and what could we have done better? Just waiting to see if anybody has anything in the chat they want to throw in. Anything that we did well? I mean, beside the fact that Colin is, you know, the dramatic actress of my time, you know. All right. Not seeing anything coming in the chat, so I'm gonna cheat a little bit and let you all know at least what I think we did well. One of the things that went really well, debriefing the volunteers' experience and celebrating their success. I thought we did all right at talking a little bit about Colin's experience. Colin's experience, and then also sort of talking a little bit. I didn't want to get too far into it because I did want to get to the escalation, but talking a little bit about like what went well for Colin, what Colin could do differently in the future. In the future, and talking a little bit about, you know, maybe you make texts instead of calls or plus your calls, you know, whatever that might be. Jeff says, good constant, you know, your constant encouragement was good. Thank you, Jeff. We do want folks, we want to celebrate their successes. Things that we could have done. Just getting into number 2 here. This is where I did such a bad job. We didn't talk at all about what it actually meant to be a phone bank captain. I just said, hey, Colin, do you want to be my phone bank captain? And she was like, do you want me to do both of these phone banks? Like, what is the deal? Are they already scheduled? Yeah, Britt says, could have been more clear about the role and the expectations, the extra time commitments, and the time commitments added with your suggestion of more confirms. Totally. That's it. That is it. And in terms of the hard ask, clear next steps, you know, partially I think that this was, we saw this sort of in the conversation where I didn't give Colin enough information, right? She was like, well, what do I have to do? And who should we talk to about this? And like understanding all those things. We got to the end, like in the end, we got to a good place, right? Which funnily enough was very similar to a lot of the examples that y'all dropped in the chat earlier around like ways we might test folks or ways we might like want to engage people's leadership. So that was something that I would say is like 50-50. All right. So one-on-one, setting expectations. This is what I could have done, right? Every Tuesday and Thursday, I want Colin to host these virtual phone banks from 5:30 to 7:30. Colin will work for an additional 2 hours every week to manage the volunteer attendance and questions via Slack. Colin will report directly to the organization's field organizer. I probably should have talked about that, right? And that she will need to check in with the volunteer canvas captain. Is there anything else that she might want to know, right? Colin wanted to know about the flexibility of the schedule because she has some needs for flexibility via her work schedule, right? Different things like that. Okay. So we're coming up a little bit on our time. We're not going to have time to do this full exercise. The exercise here is to write out talking points for an escalation one-on-one for a volunteer in your organization. It's where, of course, you'll debrief, share strategy, and make a hard ask. I'm just wondering, maybe because we don't have time for this full question, I'm just wondering if folks have a volunteer already in mind that they are gonna move up the ladder of engagement. And if you do, I would love for you to type in the chat and tell us like what you would like to ask that person to take on. So just 1 second. Just take 1 second to drop in the chat. Or if you don't know yet who you might want to escalate, you can put that in the chat too. But wondering if folks already have thoughts about who they're going to escalate. Nobody yet? They're coming, y'all, I promise. All right. Knowing that we're getting short on time, I am going to keep us, every time I say, okay, I'm just going to keep moving forward, I get somebody in the chat. Programs, that's excellent. Oh no. Am I losing internet? No. Can anybody hear me? Oh, okay. It seems like I'm still moving. So sorry, y'all. I'm getting a notification that the stream is having a connection issue, but I'm just going to keep on keeping on. All right. Okay. Okay, we're in the share out. And Jeff did share with us, young professional, promoting into a leadership role. Anybody else? We'll do just I'll do one last call. Anybody else who has a thought about who they might engage in escalation? Whew. All right, y'all. Questions. This is our last question point of the evening. So again, pausing here, and I am seeing from Jeff that the speaker chat runs about a minute behind, which I did not know is useful for me to know that I need to just tweet it out 1 more minute. So if there are any remaining questions that folks have that we have not answered in this time together about volunteer engagement, about moving people up the ladder of engagement, we have a couple of minutes to do so. So I'm just going to keep talking a little bit. But if folks have questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat and I will get to them as I start seeing them come in. But with that, I will start to move us toward the end of our program today. So takeaways. Using a ladder of engagement framework will help you build strong volunteer teams. So going back all the way to the beginning, that volunteer ladder of engagement is going to look a little bit different based on your organization and your work, but having your ladder of engagement is really critical and going to be useful to building your teams. Also, very important to building your teams are having those one-on-one conversations, that critical for strong leaders, for building a stronger team on the whole. And that successful escalation one-on-one does include that debrief, that strategy sharing. Other people might think of that as like the why. Why am I doing this thing? And then that hard ask, where you're going to make that ask no matter how much you feel like you're asking for, you're going to just say it and you're going to stop talking and let the person that you have asked answer your question. All right. I do not see any questions in the chat, so I think we might wrap it up just a little bit early today. I'm sure y'all have been doing Netroots for several days now, so I know that it's always a lot, and on the internet it continues to be a lot. So I do appreciate y'all taking the time to be here with me today. I do have an evaluation that you can see the link for right here, the bit.ly dropped right on the screen. If you have a moment to give me a little bit of feedback, that is super helpful for me. Yes, Carolyn, don't forget to rate this session. The feedback is super helpful for me. I do hope that this was useful for you all, and that there was something that y'all were able to take away, from our time today. After this training, if you have questions, you can send your questions to questions@traindemocrats.org, and they can answer questions. I do want to there is a question here, will you be posting the slides somewhere? I don't know the answer to that question. What I can say is that the NDTC's website, traindems.org, has everything you would ever need to run a campaign. So if you don't have if you don't get this deck in particular, you can find this content, if not this exact deck, I'm sure a very similar deck on NTDC's website, traindemocrats.org. Please do give feedback to me, your trainer. I'm Mallory Long. If you would have any reason to want to talk to me, I'm mallorythetrainer@gmail.com. And I do appreciate y'all's time. Please let me know, again, if you have, questions or whatever, you can reach out. You can reach out to us at I already forgot the email address, questions@traindemocrats.org. A little more information. You can see the website there. You can follow NTDC on social. And I think that is it for me, y'all. Again, really appreciate you being here. Happy Netroots, and go out there, build your ladder of engagements, build your teams. I promise you, your people are coming. And I think that's it. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a good night.